Hi, before we get started, I just have a couple of super quick announcements. First, our Jungian psychotherapy program and Jungian studies program are still accepting applications through July 1st. And I recently uploaded a few new Robert Moore items to our online store. If you're a fan of Robert Moore, at the store page, you can just scroll down and it'll show new uploads. And there's also a little widget with new uploads on our homepage if you just scroll down. Also, thank you to everyone who supported our first spring fundraising drive. We managed to meet our goal, so we did receive the matching grant, and so I just want to thank everyone who participated in that. Also, if you missed our spring gala, the video is still live on YouTube, and there's a link on the blog, so you just go to the Jungian Anthology blog, and it's currently the first post. I'll also add a link in the show notes. That's it. Okay, thanks. Welcome to the Jungian Anthology podcast from the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. Archetypes, planets, and glimpses into a new worldview with Richard Tarnas. We were honored to have best-selling author Richard Tarnas on the podcast. In this interview with host Patricia Martin, he offers compelling insights into the archetypal dynamics now unfolding in the world and how these coincide with certain major planetary alignments. Tarnas considers how our evolving understanding of the underlying unity of psyche and cosmos has relevance for the profound transformation humanity is currently undergoing, and he looks several years into the future to discuss the implications of major upcoming transits from a Jungian perspective. This interview is full of rich insights delivered with Tarnas' distinctive warmth and vision. Richard Tarnas is the founding director of the graduate program in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, where he currently teaches. Born in 1950 in Geneva, Switzerland, of American parents, he grew up in Michigan, where he received a classical Jesuit education. In 1968, he entered Harvard, where he studied Western intellectual and cultural history and depth psychology, graduating with an A.B. cum laude in 1972. For 10 years, he lived and worked at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, studying with Stanislav Grof, Joseph Campbell, Gregory Bateson, Huston Smith, and James Hillman, later serving as Esalen's Director of Programs and Education. He received his Ph.D. from Saybrook Institute in 1976 with a dissertation on LSD psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, and spiritual transformation. From 1980 to 1990, he wrote The Passion of the Western Mind, a narrative history of Western thought from the ancient Greek to the postmodern, which became the bestseller and continues to be a widely used text in universities throughout the world. In 2006, he published Cosmos and Psyche, Intimations of a New Worldview, which received the Book of the Year prize from the Scientific and Medical Network in the UK. Formerly president of the International Transpersonal Association, he is on the board of governors of the C.G. Jung Institute in San Francisco. In addition to his teaching at CIIS, he has been a frequent lecturer at Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara and gives many public lectures and seminars in the U.S. and abroad. Richard encourages listeners to view a video on YouTube called Richard Tarnas on the Planets in 2021 via the CIIS YouTube channel, and there's a link in the show notes. We also have a lecture recording in our online store when he came to speak at our Founders Day Symposium in 2018. It's called A Kairos Moment in an Archetypal Cosmos, and there's a link to that in the show notes. So now here's the interview.
Hello, this is Patricia Martin, and I'm a cultural analyst, author, and professional affiliate at the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. Today, I'm with Richard Tarnas, historian and founding director of the graduate program in philosophy, cosmology, and Consciousness at the California Institute of Integral Studies. He's also the author of 2 best-selling books, Passion of the Western Mind and Cosmos and Psyche. The latter was named Book of the Year by the Scientific and Medical Network. Richard served for many years on the Board of Governors of the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco. He speaks around the world on topics such as creating a sustainable society, synchronicity, and Jungian archetypes and astrology. We're so honored to have you on the show today. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Patricia. Happy to be here.
You've studied the work of Carl Jung extensively, and you write a fair bit on the Jungian idea of archetypes. How do archetypes play a role in the drama that is facing the Earth community today?
Well, Jung recognized that informing the human psyche at both the individual level but also the collective level, that informing everything that we experience, that we not only dream and bring forth in our artistic creativity and so forth, but our most essential experience is constantly being shaped by these powerful archetypal forces, principles, essences, and when he recognized that, it was, first of all, as a result of going deep in his own, as I don't have to tell your audience, I mean, deep in through his own transformational crucible of his own journey, psychologically, spiritually, and he just got to such a deep level that he was able to access what he called either the collective unconscious or the archetypal unconscious, this vast domain of psyche that informs our experience even in the most individual ways. And I remember Joseph Campbell often came to Esalen Institute where I lived and worked for a decade, and I used to be program director there, and he would come and give seminars every year, and he liked to compare Freud and Jung by saying, well, Freud was fishing, but he was sitting on a whale, and and it was Jung that basically recognized that there was a whale there, that it was, and Jung himself, by the way, actually used that metaphor. When was it? Oh, it was right after he had finished Answer to Job, his great kind of prophetic essay on, in some ways, one of the most important things he wrote when he was in his mid-70s, and he said in a letter, he said, "I have landed the great whale," because it was such a powerful. He kind of had accessed such a powerful level of what was shaping the evolution of human religious consciousness, and particularly in the West, and in as influenced by Christianity and Judaism. So anyway, when Jung gets this insight in the early part of his career about the power and even dominance of archetypal forms in shaping human experience, he was actually recovering a deep insight that went back to the ancients, to traditional peoples, indigenous societies, and where they recognized that there were gods and goddesses or powerful spirit beings that were, in a sense, the immortals or the eternals that were shaping the mortal and finite experience of the human being. And they had a kind of awe about this. And it was really the Platonists, Plato and his successors, that kind of transformed the idea of gods and goddesses into the idea that there were these archetypal principles at the very top of the ladder of reality. And for example, Plato said all things that are beautiful to the precise extent that they are participating in an archetypal form of beauty itself with a capital B, the very principle or eternal essence of the beautiful. Now, an ancient prior to Plato would have said, to the extent that Aphrodite was present, or Venus, or some other powerful being of great that represented beauty. Well, when Jung comes along, he's coming into a world in which the gods and goddesses, as well as these kind of Platonic transcendent ideas or forms, have been erased from serious intellectual discourse. And yet he finds, when he delves deeply into his own psyche, into that of his patients, into dreams and into works of art and religious experience and so forth, he rediscovers this domain. And so when we bring this into the understanding of our current moment in history, it's an extremely helpful lens by which we can recognize deeper patterns at work. And in a way, we could talk a little bit, if you'd like, about what I see right now as being, some of the more potent mythic archetypal dramas that are in a sense shaping our historical moment.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to consider applying the ideas of the archetype and archetypal energy and psyche to the current moment. Please.
Well, Jung himself, of course, initiated this within depth psychology. He initiated this application of what he learned in his own interior life and in that of his patients, recognizing that the same thing was operative in history. In a sense, he brought to modern psychology the recognition that every individual life is on a journey, that it's in some sense, a life is not just a kind of series of years that have a kind of neutral, homogenized quality. There is an unfolding narrative. There's a spiritual and psychological story or narrative or drama that's unfolding. We're on a journey, and that was one big recognition, that it was a spiritually meaningful journey. This is rather different than, say, Freudian psychoanalysis, and certainly very different from behaviorism or some of the more those kinds of psychology that more or less don't recognize that there is a depth dimension to human experience. So he first made that very important recognition. He brought that into our psychological discourse, but he then made an even more kind of, in certain ways, even more dramatic insight available to modern depth psychology, and that's the recognition that our individual psycho-spiritual journeys are each embedded in a collective spiritual and moral and psychological journey. And that collective journey that we're all on is shaping us in certain ways. When we're born into a certain time, in a certain culture, we are carrying the historical destiny, as it were, of that era and of that culture, this moment, into our own experience, and what we do and say shapes in turn the collective. So it's a kind of recursive loop by which the larger whole is shaping the part of each of our individual lives, and our individual lives and actions and so forth are feeding back into the whole, into the collective, so that the next moment, the next era, the next generation carries everything that we have done, said, thought, also what we didn't do, what we didn't resolve, and it carries those that kind of evolution into itself. They're born with into a world that is not a blank slate, but that is just as we are. We're not born into a world that's a blank slate. Rather, we are carrying a great long historical and even evolutionary drama going back many millennia, and in some sense millions of years, once you recognize that we go all the way down into the origins of life, into the evolution of the earth, into the evolution of the cosmos. So in all those ways, Jung he brought this depth psychology orientation to understanding our historical moment, and recognizing that we have a kind of historical and moral responsibility in what our consciousness brings to this moment, and how courageous we are, or not courageous, in our willingness to look deeply into our depths and to integrate them, because what we don't integrate becomes an unconscious power, a force, we either through denial or suppression or compartmentalization or projection onto others, and that becomes a kind of shadow that can really have destructive consequences. So he called on us to do the hard work of interior exploration and integration of things that we might not want to look at in ourselves. And that's true also at the collective level. Historically, and our nation, for example, here in the United States, I think in certain ways the last few years have been one of the most important moral crises of our time, of our history, because more than at any time, certainly since, I'm 71 years old now, and at any time in my life, this has been the period that has most come into recognition of the fact that our aspirations as a nation, our shining city on the hill that would illuminate the world with the light of our ideals that we're bringing into reality here, that there's a whole nother story going on, and that we have a past that is rooted in great injustices and great suffering by whether it's the past of our slavery, or the present of the continuing racism, or the decimation of indigenous cultures, the Native Americans that were here before Europeans came here, and so forth. And to come into a recognition of that shadow side of the American experiment, as noble as that experiment has been, to come into recognition of that shadow side is absolutely essential for us to evolve as a nation, as a collective psyche. The idea of cultural complexes, for example, is something that a number of Jungians have developed out of Jung's work, and
So
our own cultural complex.
This makes me wonder, Richard, if what you might be referring to is also playing out in the cosmos. So, for instance, I believe I read somewhere that the millennial generation came into the world under the influence of Chiron, the wounded healer. And I find it interesting that there's a great deal of hope and also maybe a little projection on that generation to sort of mop up. And I wonder if, do I have that right about the millennial generation?
Well, there's a lot of things that could be said about the millennial generation, and indeed, there. On the one hand, there could be a tendency, and I suppose it's out there, to think that either to idealize that generation in such a way that it divests the older generations of their responsibility, and that the millennials are going to take care of it, or but there's all sorts of other characterizations that could be made. I think the Chiron reference, Jung noticed, of course, that when his understanding of synchronicity is quite profound. The idea that any given moment in time has a certain coherence to it, so that events that happen in different parts of the world, or in the inner world of the interior psyche of a person, and then in the external world around them, that there's not a linear causal relationship between events that are happening out there and events happening in here. But and yet he would recognize that there was an archetypal parallel, that there was a coincidence of meaning. And a number of commentators have pointed out that the discovery of new celestial bodies, for example, coincides with a period that is often somehow shaped by the mythic resonances of that celestial body, either as it's been named or as it emerges through observation as carrying a certain archetypal quality. So Jung was very interested in astrology, from going back to around 1909, 10, 11. He was already studying it quite a bit, writing Freud about it, and recognizing that the charts of his patients seemed to give him insight. The birth charts, the horoscopes of his patients, seemed to give him insights about what were the principal archetypal dynamics that were shaping that person's kind of predispositions psychologically and so forth. And that actually kept developing through his life until by the later 40s, early 50s, he said he was using he didn't broadcast this, I think, for very good reasons, but he told people privately that, and his family certainly knew this, his daughter became an astrologer, that he was finding it so useful that he was using the birth chart information with each of his patients. What's true at the individual level also seems to be true at the collective level, and he, in his book Ion, he explores this in one way, and the fact that Chiron was discovered in the late 70s has been seen by some as correlated with a certain, like that the people born in the aftermath of that might have some of that kind of chironic quality. What I and others who have, like, for example, part of the Archetypal Research Collective here in the Bay Area, or in my graduate school where I've taught for many years, California Institute of Integral Studies, Stan Grof, who's a depth psychologist, very much influenced by Jung. He's a psychiatrist and founder of transpersonal psychology. And he and I have taught graduate courses for many years in which we explore the extraordinary correlations, much to our surprise, between the movements of the planets as registered in the in the horoscope, the birth charts, and in what's called transits, like where the planets are at any given time, how they line up geometrically with an individual's birth chart, seems to coincide with remarkable consistency with the archetypal dynamics of that person's experience at that time, to such a great extent that this combination of studying birth charts on their own to get a lens into what's the overall kind of shape of a person's the archetypal configurations of their deep psyche, and the bringing in of personal transits to get a sense for how they are unfolding at any given time, like what archetypal complexes are being activated at what time, for how long, and so forth. This has turned out to be such a valuable area of research that we Stan Grof calls archetypal astrology the Rosetta Stone of the human psyche. Which is something very similar to what Jung would talk about, that astrology in his mind was the sum total of all the ancient wisdom and knowledge about the psyche from the ancients and the medieval period. And then he said, in our modern era, because the stars have fallen, we have the need for psychology, and particularly for adept psychology, because we no longer recognize the cosmos itself as carrying archetypal meaning. The modern worldview is one in which there's been a disenchantment of the world, and there's been it's just moving matter that is evolving and then randomly bringing forth consciousness in human beings that are a kind of isolated entity in a vast, unconscious, purposeless, meaningless universe. And Jung said, given that situation, we had to discover the unconscious, because it's no longer, the deep meanings of life are no longer found in the whole, in the larger vessel of nature that we are embedded in, and no longer in the cosmos. But what his ideas around and insights around synchronicity, and then around astrology, where he saw that, in a sense, that would be like synchronicity on a vast scale, a kind of cosmic scale. He came to recognize that the psyche isn't really limited to the human cranium inside our skulls. What did Alan Watts call it? Skin-encapsulated egos. Not just ego, but even the idea that the psyche, that it's only inside our individual skulls. Jung broke out of that insight, out of that limited vision, and saw psyche, that we are in psyche rather than psyche being in us, and that there is something which the ancients called the anima mundi, the soul of the world, that the human soul, the human psyche, individual and collective, is embedded in, and that we are not an isolated entity in a vast cosmic void, but are in fact participants in a larger unfolding soul of the world, and then the recognition that the movements of the planets seem to bear a consistent correlation with the archetypal dynamics of human history, has just opened up a whole invaluable domain of research, because it gives us a lot of insights into what's going on right now and how that connects to other historical periods that had comparable alignments, but we're in a new moment that has evolved, and yet those same archetypal energies are constellated again, and we have it gives us this whole nother frame of reference and lens, almost like an archetypal telescope by which we can see a bigger picture of what might be unfolding right now.
Well, I'm very curious about this because I, like everyone else, you wake up and you look at the headlines from 2021, and it's history being written in very large type. And, the protests in the streets, the mob action at the U.S. Capitol, it kind of points to America having an identity crisis. And it's sort of a descent story that makes you wonder, where's the bottom? And how will the identity emerge? How will the psychic structure of the nation weather this and grow from this? And so I just wonder if you could talk more specifically about the larger forces at work here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think you put your finger on exactly. I mean, our nation in particular, as well as the planet, the Earth community, and the human species, all are going through a very profound crisis. And when it comes to the human realm, very definitely an identity crisis. So that both the United States as a nation, it's kind of gone through a kind of death. It seems to be involved in a kind of initiatory rite of passage almost, and I think this is also true of Homo sapiens and of our larger modern civilization. That our old identity is going through a dying, and there's a powerful impulse for a kind of moral transformation that will be necessary, that has a lot to do with coming into a more mutually respectful, even reverential relationship with the whole. That is, within our country, the different peoples, races, genders, ethnic lineages, and so forth. That there be a movement into a more life-enhancing, mutually respectful relationship, rather than this kind of top-down, the assumption of, say, a kind of Eurocentric white superiority or patriarchy, and the same thing is true for the civilization as a whole, and for the human self-image. That assumption that the human being is this kind of isolated top of a pyramid that is superior to the rest of all other animals, all other forms of life, and so forth, and that gives the human being and, like, modern civilization, the right to just kind of extract and exploit in an objectified way whatever it wants out of the natural environment to serve its own purposes. That's going through a kind of a global crisis, whether it's the climate crisis is in certain ways the most pervasive global crisis of all. But then it takes forms of the social and political form, and the economic, and these are all basically moral crises. And I'm convinced that as we look around at the various features of our moment, it's hard to avoid the conclusion that all the typical characteristics of an ancient ritual of initiation, a rite of passage, where there is a dying of an old identity and the birth of a new one, which as we know from the work of Jung, of Eliade, who was for many years in your city there in Chicago, at the University of Chicago, or the work of all those who have studied initiatory rites of passage, Joseph Campbell, for example, we know that the main features are that there is a kind of there is a confrontation with a great danger. There is a considerable uncertainty about the future. There is a sense of facing dark forces. There is a sense that the peril is so great that it's a mortal danger. There's often a sense that one's reality structure is somehow collapsing, and that one doesn't know what's real. There is often a quality of physical suffering, and all these are taking place in the initiatory ritual as part of a kind of unfolding that is shaping the birth of the emergence of the shaman, or it is transforming the child or the adolescent into the mature adult. Our modern civilization has not maintained sacred rites of passage, and as a result, we don't do what ancient and indigenous cultures have done for centuries, which is create a ritual context whereby people can go through a dying of their old limited identity and connect to the deep archetypal forces of life and death, that deep within themselves, but deep within within nature and within the cosmos. And as a result of connecting with that depth, they can emerge with a new sense of who they are that allows them to re-engage the adventure of life, but no longer from the point of view of being the kind of isolated individual who thinks they're very special because of their isolation, but rather they recognize that they are flowerings or individuated expressions of the cosmos itself and of the earth itself, and of the ongoing ancestral lineage that is flowing through them. And as a result, they're able to come into life with a greater sensitivity to the needs of the whole, and including 7 generations hence, rather than just looking at the immediate well-being of like the quarterly corporate profit report, and instead thinking about how are my actions, how is my company's actions, how are my nation's actions going to affect the whole for generations into the future. And so I'm convinced that we're going through a kind of collective pressure cooker of a death rebirth process. And we know that there are very few things that can reconfigure moral values than a near-death experience. And in some sense, I think on January 6th of this year, 2021, our nation went through a kind of near-death experience as we watched the Capitol be overcome by the mob, and the violence, the rage, the ugliness of it, and a profound, suddenly realizing how fragile and volatile our democracy is after all this time of thinking it was more stable. And
well, it
go
makes
ahead,
me wonder,
Patricia.
Richard. You're also a classic scholar, and you study mythology, and I wonder how we will reemerge from this, and if that is playing out in the cosmos. In other words, are we an adolescent who's, 13 going on 14, or are we 19 going on 20? Like, in other words, it seems to me for the collective to face these challenges and re-emerge, right, from the depths is going to take a leap of consciousness. What do you think about that?
Indeed, and I think that leap of consciousness is something that comes, I think, as the outcome of both our playing our part through courage, through stamina, resilience, the willing through our how deep and broad our imaginative capacities and our empathic capacities can reach, and I think at the same time, to some extent, there's always an element of grace, there's more forces at work than are visible to us, or that certainly than we can control, and there can be shifts in the wind. There can be the grace of sudden insights, revelations, illuminations that can transform how a person or how a society acts and envisions its condition. So, well, we have a number of lenses through which we could look at this crisis, and one is the archetypal astrological perspective, which we've referred to here a little bit, and in that perspective, we're going through a combination of extraordinarily powerful. It's a rare convergence of powerful outer planet transits that are just classic for, on the one hand, periods of extremely powerful forces unleashed in the deep psyche that can move both towards unleashing like a kind of shadow form, id, but also of great emancipatory drive and progressive impulse for a deep transformation of our values. And in fact, for those who are listening, who are, I've given lectures recently that have addressed this aspect of what we're talking about in a more focused way. Just last month, I did one for California Institute of Integral Studies as a public program, as a kind of archetypal state of the world report. So I do more justice to this there, that perhaps any listeners who are interested can just access that. I think it's called, this particular one was called Richard Tarnas on the Planets in 2021. And right when the COVID, when the pandemic crisis, which of course is another form of the, I think, a kind of initiatory facing of mortality and limitations and constraints and suffering, loss, and need to rise to the occasion of a great historical challenge. When that kicked in a year ago, I did another one of those kind of archetypal state of the world reports, and that one's called "What's Happening in the Stars Right Now." I titled it that because so many people were asking, either me or just asking, period, what's happening in the stars right now?
What's going on, Richard? Please.
Yeah.
But you know what? We just to let people know, we will make sure that we post links to those on the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago's website, along with this podcast, so they can access both of those.
Right. That's great. So what I would just say by way of a kind of very brief summary, and keep in mind when we're talking about planetary movements and the cycles, and how they move into the outer planets, move into conjunctions or oppositions with respect to the Earth. We're not talking about the planets causing things happening here in a kind of, as if it's like electromagnetic radiation that's coming from them and forcing us like puppets to act or be or experience in a certain way. It's not like that. It seems to be more of a synchronistic coherence of meaning and pattern through the entire universe, macrocosm and microcosm of the human individual and the human species. And so this is much more like, as Plotinus said, everything's interconnected, and the movements of the stars are and all things are constantly kind of giving indications of the deeper patterns and meanings of life. And that's because everything, as he put it, everything breathes together. It's a beautiful understanding. It's very holistic, and I think completely right on. It's holistic, inner and outer, as well as all the different parts of the visible universe. So if I were to summarize in a single sentence what I see as the kind of a deeper coherent meaning underlying the convergence of the several outer planets that are in major alignment right now, I would say that this is a time in which there is volcanic evolutionary pressures pushing for, impelling a radical reconfiguration of structures in the most fundamental way of all life structures. I think that's pretty much the most concise summary that I could give of the overall kind of convergence of alignments that are now sorry, can you still hear me right now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I had to shift my microphone. I think that's the best concise overall summary of a kind of larger meaning of this rare and powerful convergence of the outer planets right now, and what this kind of underlying significance that I see as shaping the human drama at this point in time.
So as I think about this, and I'm reflecting on some of what we talked about earlier, you were talking about the interplay between the individual psyche and the collective psyche. And so it makes me wonder, that's a great big picture that you gave us. On a personal level, we're just kind of climbing out of a pandemic. We're undergoing a very serious crisis in the world ecology and climate change. And the digital culture is now descending and infiltrating sort of how we come to understand ourselves. So with all of this is big and heavy. And how does an individual person, what can we do to kind of guide our lives in this moment?
Yes, I think you put your finger on the fact that all the various crises of our time are they're like nested in each other in larger, so that the kind of global ecological crisis is this ongoing enormous epic making evolutionary change. In some sense, it's modern civilization is managing to crashed the Cenozoic era. I mean, it's just a huge, something on a 66 million year scale. And then, so something like the pandemic, or where there's another kind of global crisis that is particularly affecting the human species, and that as tremendously grave as it is, I think in some sense it's a kind of wake-up call for this larger, longer-term unfolding crisis for human beings to basically, among other things, to come into a different relationship with the whole, with what we are part of, rather than to be so separative from. Now, in terms of what individuals can do, I think your listeners and the members, for example, of the Jung Institute of Chicago and that community, which I very much appreciated visiting a few years ago for, I think it was like a Founders Day presentation that we had. And you're in a very good position there for several reasons. One, of course, is that you have all the insights and wisdom, and which keeps evolving within the Jungian community, the Jungian tradition that you're carrying forth, that you're developing. And so there's a lot of the need for self-understanding, for self-discernment, for paying attention to one's own deep psyche, to one's unconscious, to one's dreams, to exploring through forms of experiential psychotherapy or sacred medicine journeys or Jungian analysis and so forth. These are all ways of doing that individual private work that is so crucial for our being able to play a role in the larger transformational drama of our time. So that's one thing that is incumbent upon all of us, is to do our inner work, But the other thing that's so important is that we can't do that work on our own. And we have a need to be in communities that carry a vision of a higher good that transcends and is often contrary to or very different from that which is carried by the larger culture. So I think of communities like that as being heroic communities, because they have this kind of heroic allegiance to or fidelity to a higher good, a vision of the good that is distinct from the conventional worldview. And we can't do that on our own as individuals. It takes communities of people to support that kind of collective act of the sustained act of the moral and metaphysical imagination, to be able to hold a vision of the future and of reality, of the cosmos, of the human being, that is adequate to the demands of our time. And the beauty of a true heroic community is that a community allows individuals to go through the deep inner work, which can be very painful at times, and that can require the support of others, emotional support. If you're doing that in a community that basically kind of understands the value of a descent like that, an inward descent and transformation. I mean, Jung basically went through his deep descent, starting in 1913 in particular, and of course the Red Book is the visible expression of that. All of Jungian psychology is, in some sense, the visible expression of that descent. But he didn't do that on his own. He had support. He had support from his wife Emma, from Tony Wolfe, from the group that he kind of helped kind of collect around him, the psychology club, psychological club there in Zurich, and now we have so many kind of heroic communities out there that are carrying this, whether it's the Jungian associations and institutes around the world, or I'm amazed by how many there are. I've spoken at, just scores of them. There'll be several in a state, like Ohio or North Carolina, California, Oregon, Colorado. It's quite extraordinary. But the Waldorf school communities, the many astrological associations, the Pioneers, the Schumacher College, Esalen Institute, CIIS where I teach, Pacifica Graduate School, the many very kind of committed ecological, social, ecological, progressive associations and NGOs and community that are focused on a deep transformation. I have a lot of hope for the future because of that spontaneous emergence across the world of so many individuals and communities that are each bringing forth their particular way of participating in this great evolutionary shift. The only thing I'd add to that right now, because I think we're probably moving towards the end of our time here, has to do with hope. With that idea of hope. I don't know if there would be time to say something about that.
Yeah, I think there is, Richard. I think everybody would love to hear from you as you look at the cosmos and you study, the charts from, the micro level to the macro level. What are you seeing that could give the average person hope?
Oh, I see. So sure, I can bring in, from the astrological point of view, we're which informs a lot of us how we think about the present and the past and the looking ahead to the future. See, the future, it's important to recognize that archetypes are multivalent. They can be enacted in multiple ways that range from the most noble to the most ignoble. From every archetype has its shadow as well as its light, and it has many dimensions upon which any given archetype can express itself. Physical, psychological, spiritual, interpersonal, relational, and so forth. So it's I think of the great archetypal forces that come into relationship with each other and as mapped out in the movements of the planets as being like a great kind of, it's like chordal structures within music. And it's up to us as to what melodies we sing to those chords. It's up to us what even genres, whether it's classical or jazz or hip hop. But those chordal structures are there, and then we are given kind of both the responsibility, but also the creative freedom to enact them in a multiplicity of ways. So it's to a great extent up to us how this future is shaped. But knowing how the planets are moving and so forth. I mean, I see. Okay, in terms of our immediate situation, everybody that pays close attention to the astrological dimension of things has been quite aware for years going into this, that this period of even starting from 2018 and 19, but especially 2020 and 2021 were we're going to be a kind of eye of the needle that we are going to have to go through. It's when the rubber meets the road. The chickens come home to roost. The screw tightens. I mean, it's all the typical, stereotypical metaphors are along that line are useful there. It's a real eye of the needle through which we are having to go. But as we move from, the drama of the planets in the last several months, November, December, January, quite extraordinary. If anybody, I talk about it a bit in the presentation that we referred to earlier, that people could access. But as we're going forward, as we move deeper into the 2020s, already kind of starting now, 2021, and then even more in 2022 and 3, and then for the rest of the 20s, we're moving into some other kinds of energies. This the Uranus trine Pluto in particular, the potential, the United States chart going through its Uranus return, where there can be a kind of new birth of freedom, a new birth period, but only there's also this Pluto return going on, which is very rare in a country. You have to exist for 250 years approximately to go through a Pluto return. We are going through it. I mean, these last few years, it's as if Hades opened up its jaws and the soul of America got kind of swallowed by the underworld, and we have been living in a kind of underworld domain that has been a great shock for the Persephone in all of us, and yet it is the underworld that is where the great deep transformation takes place. And as we're moving into this new into the 2020s, it's not that the crises of the past just disappear. Things have been set in motion that we have to deal with, but there is a real potential here for the same energies that have been at work are kind of going to be moving into a more confluent, harmonious interaction that could allow what emerges out of this crisis, this eye of the needle that we're especially embedded in right now. And I think we're somewhat past the halfway point of that at this point.
Thank God.
Yeah. But that we could move into, I think I have a real hope that we can rise to the occasion, and that in some sense there's going to be cosmic forces that will be there to support that. But I do want to say one last thing about hope itself and the role that it can play, because hope is a what did Nietzsche call it? It's the rainbow that is above the cascade of life. Hope is not just, it's not a kind of just like an optimistic assessment of where we are and what looking at the variables, what's going to emerge in a kind of rational assessment. That's not what hope is. Hope is more like it's like a spiritual quality or virtue that is cultivated and that actually can play a role, I think, in reaching out into a future potential, and bringing that ideal. It's like planting a seed into the future that can blossom, and if by bringing forth this act of hope and this act of faith in the larger good of the cosmos, in the unfolding wisdom of something that's much bigger than any of us as individuals, and much bigger even than the human being collectively, that we're participating in something that's very, very deep and large, very great. And if we have that able to access that sense of faith in the whole, it can give us a sense of hope for the future that actually can play an active participatory role in bringing forth a more life-enhancing future. It's not just a kind of assessment. It's part of our spiritual contribution that could be made to the unfolding of our future.
That's a beautiful note to end on, Richard. I want to thank you on behalf of the Institute and all our listeners for just a wonderful way of seeing what's unfolding. And that is that we're all responsible for cultivating hope because it will change the dynamic. And I wish you well, and I hope to have you back on the show. Let me just end with one last question. What's new for Richard Tarnas? New book, new...
Well,
it's a heavy question, I know. It's like asking the graduate student if they've got their thesis done, you know?
Well, there's, as one gets, I suppose everybody during this pandemic period has gone through those kind of important assessments of like what's really important in life, and what and especially if one is in one's later decades, those kinds of thoughts are especially likely to come to the surface, and I certainly have thought of those kinds of things. I've had several books in me. As you can see, I'm not that prolific. I've done 2 books in my last 30, 40 years, and that's partly because as a professor, you're very busy teaching, and
and those are really sweeping books, Richard. Like,
thank you.
They
took a long time.
They were,
So,
expansive.
But I have been. There's been 4 or 5 other books on that are kind of connected to those 2 that are things that I have been writing out in my notebooks for years. In a sense, they're all written, but I need to take the time to turn them into that final form that I feel right about publishing them. And so I'm moving towards, I've been cutting down my teaching so that I'm just part-time, and then I'm kind of moving towards retirement about 2023 from being the professor, and so that I can really focus on bringing the rest of my books out while I still have the, God willing, the mental clarity and stamina that is necessary for that kind of intellectual.
It's rigorous work.
It is. So that's one big thing. There's also been a documentary series that's based on my work that several filmmakers have been working on the last 6 years or so, called Changing of the Gods, and that's moving. They're almost finished, and I see that's going to be coming out later this year. So while it's based on my work, it isn't. I'm not making the film, but it is related, and it is related to me, and so I guess that would be part of my what I'm thinking of in terms of what's coming in the future. So those are the big things. I think I'd also like to make some like a video series or something like that would make some of the things that I've been teaching for years with my graduate students, to make that more available to others before
Well, we hope to have you back whenever any of those projects that are percolating and underway are ready. Be in touch, and we'd be honored to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you. You're a great interviewer, as I'm sure others have told you, and it's a pleasure, a very, very flowing kind of way of exploring these deep topics together.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
This podcast is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Share it all you like as long as you maintain the attribution to the speaker, but please do not change it or sell it. If you like this episode, tell your friends about us or leave us a review on iTunes. For more information about classes, training programs, videos, audio, this podcast, or to find a Jungian analyst near you, visit our website, www.jungchicago.org.
Thank you to our 2020 donors who gave at the contributing member level and above: Barbara Anand, Usha and Ashok Beatty, Jackie Cabe Bryan, Eric Cooper and Judith Cooper, Kevin Davis, George J. Didier, Mary Doherty, James Fidelibus, John Korolewski, Marty Manning, Diane Sherwood, Deborah P. Stutzman, Deborah Tobin, Alexander Wayne and Lynn Kopp, Gerald Weiner, Karen West and James Taylor, and Ellen Young. If you would like to join our generous community of supporters, just go to jungchicago.org/give.